I stood on my own front porch, my key useless in my hand, while my brother Wesley smiled from behind the door I'd walked through for 32 years. The October wind cut through my teaching cardigan, the one with the apple print my students loved, but the cold spreading through my chest had nothing to do with the weather. "Dad left everything to me, Ramona," Wesley said, his voice smooth like he was closing one of his car deals. "You have 24 hours to get your things out." Behind him, I could see my sister Judith pulling my books off the shelves, the ones Dad and I had built together last summer, when his hands were still steady enough to hold a hammer. She was dropping them into garbage bags like they were trash, not the first editions Dad had spent years collecting for me at yard sales and estate auctions. "Wesley, this is insane." My voice cracked as Mrs. Patterson from next door came out to her porch, pretending to water flowers that had been dead since September. "I live here. I've been taking care of Dad for 5 years. And now Dad's gone." Wesley adjusted his expensive watch, the one he made sure everyone knew cost more than my teacher's salary. "He finally saw sense before he died, realized you were just a leech, living off his pension while the rest of us made something of ourselves." Mr. Yamamoto across the street was checking his mailbox for the 3rd time, and the Henderson kids had stopped their bike riding to stare. The entire neighborhood was watching me get evicted from my childhood home by my own brother. Where am I supposed to go? The question came out smaller than I meant it to, like I was 8 years old again, asking Wesley why he'd locked me out of the treehouse. "That's not my problem," Wesley said. "Maybe if you'd spent less time playing nurse and more time building an actual career, you'd have options. Judith, how much longer?" Judith appeared in the doorway with another garbage bag, this one bulging with what looked like my winter clothes. She wouldn't meet my eyes, just pushed the bag toward me like I was a stranger at a donation center, not her baby sister who used to braid her hair before school. "Your immediate necessities," she said quietly. "Clothes, toiletries, your teaching supplies. Wesley says we'll send the rest later." "Judith, please, you know this isn't right. You were there when Dad made me promise to never leave him alone. You heard him." She turned away, but I caught the flicker of guilt in her eyes. "Wesley has the will, Ramona. It's legal. Dad signed it. 2 months ago, when he could barely remember what day it was," I was shouting now, not caring that the whole neighborhood could hear. "When he was on so much morphine, he called me Mom." Wesley stepped forward, forcing me to back up on the porch I'd helped Dad paint just last spring. "Careful, Ramona. Slander is a serious accusation. I have witnesses who'll say Dad was perfectly lucid when he signed. Now, I've already called the police to inform them of the situation. They said it's a civil matter, so don't even think about trying to make a scene." A police cruiser drove by right then, slowing down just enough for the officer to look at us, nod to Wesley, and keep driving. Wesley smiled, that same cruel smile from when he used to pin me down and tickle me until I cried, then tell Mom I was being dramatic. 24 hours, Ramona," he said, starting to close the door. "After that, anything left becomes property of the estate, meaning mine. Oh, and don't try the basement or back doors. We've changed all the locks." The door shut with a click that sounded like the end of everything. I stood there holding 2 garbage bags of my life while the house I'd grown up in, the house where Mom taught me to make soup, where Dad helped me with algebra, where I'd nursed my father through his final months, suddenly became somewhere I wasn't welcome. I walked to my car, a 15-year-old Honda with a rattling heater, and threw the bags in the back seat. Mrs. Patterson had gone inside, but I could see her curtain twitch. Mr. Yamamoto was still at his mailbox, frozen like he didn't know whether to help or hide. The Henderson kids pedaled away fast when I looked their direction. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands shaking too hard to get the key in the ignition. Through the dining room window, I could see Wesley and Judith moving around, probably deciding which of Dad's things to sell first. The window where Dad used to wait for me to come home from school, even when I was 38 and teaching school myself. He'd wave from that window every morning when I left, and every afternoon when I returned. But I didn't know then what I know now. I didn't know that Dad had been 3 steps ahead of Wesley all along. I didn't know about the hidden safe, the real will, or the camera that had captured everything. I didn't know that in less than 48 hours, my brother's smile would disappear forever when my father's estate lawyer, Mr. Foxworth, would walk into Wesley's perfect house and speak just 5 words that would change everything. Right then, sitting in my car with everything I owned in 2 garbage bags, I only knew one thing. My father had called me his sunshine, and sunshine always finds a way through the clouds. Wesley thought he'd locked me out, but he'd forgotten that Dad taught me to always keep spare keys in unexpected places. The question was whether I'd find them in time. 3 weeks earlier, I was grading spelling tests at the kitchen table when the call came. It was a Tuesday, 3:47 p.m., and I remember because I'd just written excellent on Timmy Morrison's paper when he finally got necessary, right after struggling with it all month. The phone rang with that sharp, urgent sound that somehow tells you everything is about to change. Is this Ramona Thorne? The voice was professional, but gentle. The way people speak when they're about to deliver news that will break you. Yes, this is she. This is Mercy General Hospital. Your father, Theodore Thorne, was brought in about an hour ago. He suffered a massive heart attack. You should come right away. The red pen fell from my hand, rolling across Timmy's perfect spelling test, leaving a long red line like a wound. I don't remember driving to the hospital, but I remember the smell of the waiting room, that mix of disinfectant and despair, and how Wesley showed up in his BMW still wearing his golf clothes, annoyed that he'd been pulled from the country club. Dad was gone before sunset. The neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had found him in his garden, slumped over his prized tomato plants. He'd been so proud of those tomatoes this year, had been planning to enter them in the county fair. The nurses said he'd still been clutching 3 perfect red ones when the paramedics arrived, like he'd been choosing the best ones for dinner. I'd been living with Dad for 5 years by then, ever since my divorce from Robert. What was supposed to be a few weeks to get back on my feet had turned into something else entirely when I realized Dad needed me. Not in dramatic ways at first, just small things. He'd forget to eat lunch, leave the stove on, miss his medications. The man who'd raised 3 kids alone after Mom died, who'd worked 30 years carrying mail through blizzards and heat waves, was slowly fading like an old photograph. Wesley had called it freeloading from the start. You're 38 years old, Ramona, living in your childhood bedroom like some kind of failure, he'd said when I moved back. He lived 15 minutes away in a house with 6 bedrooms and a 3-car garage, but visiting Dad once a month for an hour was his limit. He'd show up, usually with some expensive gadget Dad would never use, complain about the house needing updates, then leave for another month. Judith was better, but not by much. She'd stop by every other week, usually on her way to show houses to clients, her real estate blazer perfect, and her smile practiced. She'd bring store-bought cookies and pretend they were homemade, flutter around Dad for 20 minutes, asking if he needed anything while checking her phone, then rush off to another appointment. But she'd always pause at the door and ask me, "You're okay here, right? Not too much for you?" Like caring for our father was some kind of burden instead of a privilege. But those 5 years with Dad were everything. Every morning started the same way. I'd come downstairs at 6:30 to find him already in the kitchen, trying to make coffee with shaking hands. I'd take over, making it exactly how he liked it. 2 sugars, splash of milk, stirred counterclockwise because that's how Mom used to do it. We'd sit together while I prepared for school, and he told me stories about his mail route, the same stories I'd heard 100 times but never got tired of hearing. Evenings were for watching Jeopardy together, Dad shouting wrong. Answers with complete confidence while I graded papers. He'd help me create lesson plans, suggesting books he thought my 4th graders would love. "Make them fall in love with reading, Mona," he'd say. "A child who reads becomes an adult who thinks." The last year had been harder. The mild confusion became moderate dementia. The steady hands that had built half our furniture now struggled with buttons. The man who'd memorized every address on his mail route would get lost walking to the corner store. But there were still perfect moments, crystalline and precious. Like the night before he died, when the morphine had worn off enough for him to really see me, and he'd squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Mona," he'd said, using my childhood nickname, "you've been my sunshine. Don't let anyone tell you different. You came back when I needed you most. That's not failure, baby girl, that's love." I'd kissed his forehead, told him to rest, that I'd see him in the morning. I'd had no idea that in less than 24 hours, he'd be gone, and in 3 weeks, I'd be standing on his porch while Wesley changed the locks on the only real home I'd ever known. The funeral was small, exactly how Dad would have wanted it. His friends from the post office formed a receiving line of gray-haired men who all had stories about Theodore Thorne, the mailman who never missed a day in 30 years. They called him Steady Teddy, and each one shook my hand with the same message. Your father was the best man I ever knew. Wesley gave a eulogy that sounded like a PowerPoint presentation. He talked about Dad's work ethic, his punctuality, his contribution to society as a federal employee. Not one word about how Dad taught us to ride bikes in the cemetery parking lot because it was the safest place, or how he'd stayed up all night when Judith had pneumonia, singing the old songs Mom used to sing. Wesley mentioned responsibility 4 times and love not once. Judith cried prettily into a lace handkerchief, positioned perfectly so everyone could see her grief without her mascara running. She'd worn a designer black dress that probably cost more than Dad's monthly pension and kept checking her phone even during the service. When it was my turn to speak, I simply read Dad's favorite poem, the one Mom had written in his birthday card the year before she died. My voice broke only once, on the line about coming home. After the service, while guests ate ham sandwiches in the church basement, Wesley cornered me by the coffee pot. We need to discuss the estate, Ramona. The house, Dad's savings, his pension benefits. Wesley, we buried him an hour ago. Someone has to be practical. The house is worth at least $300,000 in this market. Split 3 ways, that's a significant amount. He pulled out his phone, showing me a real estate app. I've already had some informal appraisals done. You had the house appraised while Dad was dying? I had it. Appraised 6 months ago when it became clear Dad wasn't improving. That's called planning, Ramona. Something you might understand if you'd ever owned property instead of living off others. I wanted to throw the coffee in his face, but Mrs. Patterson was watching, and Dad would have been mortified. Instead, I walked away, leaving Wesley standing there with his phone and his calculations, already spending money from a house that still smelled like Dad's aftershave. For the next 3 days, I tried to return to normal. My principal, Goldman, a kind man who'd also lost his father recently, told me to take as much time as I needed, but I needed my 4th graders more than I needed time off. Their sticky hands and gap-toothed smiles were the only things that felt real anymore. They made me cards with backwards letters and too much glitter, and Susie Chen brought me a stuffed bear because bears give the best hugs when you're sad. Wesley started his campaign immediately. He showed up at the house the day after the funeral with a locksmith, saying he wanted to secure the property. I was sitting in Dad's chair, wearing his old cardigan, when I heard them at the door. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Changing the locks. We can't have random people with keys accessing the estate's assets." "I'm not random people. I live here." "For now," Wesley said, watching the locksmith work. "But that's going to change. I've been to see Dad's lawyer. Well, the lawyer he used for basic stuff. Apparently, Dad came to see him recently about some changes." My stomach dropped. "What kind of changes?" "You'll find out soon enough." That was Monday. By Wednesday, Judith was there too, taking pictures of every room, measuring windows, talking about staging and curb appeal. "The market is perfect right now," she kept saying. "We could list by November, close by Christmas." "I live here," I kept repeating, like a broken record. "Wesley says Dad made provisions," Judith replied, not meeting my eyes. "He says Dad felt you'd taken advantage long enough." "Taken advantage?" I wiped his face when he couldn't hold a spoon. I cleaned him when he had accidents. I held his hand through every doctor's appointment when you two were too busy to show up. "You also lived rent-free for 5 years," Wesley interrupted from the doorway. "Ate his food, used his utilities, drove his car when yours broke down. Dad finally realized you were never going to leave, never going to make something of yourself, so he made the hard choice." Thursday morning, I left for school at 7:15 like always. I'd taught my students about butterflies emerging from chrysalises, helped them with fractions, supervised their rehearsal for the Halloween play. I'd driven home thinking about what to make for dinner, forgetting for just a moment that Dad wouldn't be there to share it. That's when I found my key wouldn't turn, and Wesley appeared with his cruel smile and his 24-hour ultimatum, turning me into a stranger at my own door. I spent that night in my car, parked in the Sherwood Elementary parking lot where the security lights made me feel less alone. The garbage bags of my belongings sat in the back seat like passengers, and Dad's coffee mug was clutched in my hands, still faintly smelling of his last morning coffee. My phone battery died around midnight, which was a mercy because it stopped me from calling Wesley and begging. The temperature dropped to near freezing. I wrapped myself in the 3 sweaters Judith had packed, wondering if she'd known I'd need them all at once. Every time I dozed off, I'd jerk awake thinking I heard Dad calling for his evening medications, then remember he'd never need them again. At 5 a.m., I walked into the school using my teacher's key and washed my face in the staff bathroom. My reflection looked like a ghost, red-eyed and hollow, but I put on makeup from the emergency kit I kept in my desk and changed into the spare dress I'd thankfully left in my classroom closet. By the time Principal Goldman arrived at 6:30, I was at my desk, preparing lesson plans like it was any other Friday. "Ramona, you're here early." "Wanted to get a head start," I said, forcing a smile that felt like breaking glass. I taught all day on autopilot, helping Kevin with his multiplication, listening to Maria read, pretending everything was normal while my entire world had collapsed. During lunch, I sat in my car and called 3 lawyers. The first 2 wouldn't even schedule a consultation without a $1,000 retainer. The third, a tired-sounding man named Peterson, listened for 5 minutes, then said, "Challenging a will could take years and cost tens of thousands. If your brother has a signed document and you don't have proof of coercion or incompetence, you're looking at an uphill battle. I'm sorry." During recess duty, while watching kids play hopscotch on squares I'd painted myself last spring, something Dad used to say kept echoing in my mind. "Mona, I'm not a rich man, but I'm a prepared man." He'd said it whenever he checked the tornado supplies, or tested the smoke detectors, or updated his files in the old metal filing cabinet. Prepared. Dad was always prepared. He had contingency plans for contingency plans. He kept extra batteries in labeled drawers, emergency cash in coffee cans, important papers in the fireproof safe in the basement. The safe. My heart started racing. Wesley had changed the locks on the main doors, but had he thought about the basement door? The one behind the overgrown forsythia bush that we never used except when Dad needed to get the lawnmower out? I waited until 7 p.m. when I knew Wesley would be at his country club for Friday dinner. He was predictable as a clock, never missing his standing reservation where he could parade Nora around and talk about his dealership's quarterly numbers. Judith would be showing houses until dark, then heading home to her empty condo and her wine and her reality shows. I parked 2 blocks away and walked through the Hendersons' backyard, apologizing silently for trespassing. The forsythia bush scratched my arms as I pushed through to the basement door. My key still worked. The lock was old, installed when Reagan was president, and Wesley had forgotten it existed. The basement smelled like 40 years of life. Old paint, sawdust, the faint scent of Mom's canning from decades ago, and Dad's old spice that seemed to have seeped into the walls. I used my phone's flashlight, not daring to turn on the overhead bulb that might alert neighbors. Behind the water heater, exactly where Dad had shown me last year, was the safe. "Just in case, sunshine," he'd said then, making me repeat the combination 3 times. "Your birthday, your mother's birthday, the year we bought this house." The safe opened on the first try. Inside were insurance papers, Mom's wedding ring in its velvet box, and a manila envelope with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting. For Ramona. Open only if needed. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first thing was a business card. Foxworth and Associates, Estate Law. On the back, in Dad's shaky writing, "He knows everything. Trust him. Dad." The second item made me sink to the cold basement floor. It was another will, dated exactly 1 week before the one Wesley had shown me, properly notarized, witnessed by Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Yamamoto. This one left the house to me, with $50,000 each to Wesley and Judith from his savings. But the third item changed everything. A USB drive with a post-it note. "Mona, if you're reading this, Wesley has shown his true colors. I installed a camera in my bedroom when I started getting confused. I needed to know what happened during my bad spells. I'm sorry you have to see this. Be strong, sunshine. P.S. Foxworth has copies of everything." I sat in that basement surrounded by shadows and memories, and for the first time since Dad died, I smiled. I called Mr. Foxworth from the school parking lot at 7 a.m. Saturday morning. His secretary said he was booked solid, but when I mentioned Theodore Thorne and that it was urgent, she put me on hold. 30 seconds later, Foxworth himself was on the line. "Ramona, your father said you might call. Can you be at my office in an hour?" Gerald Foxworth looked exactly like the kind of lawyer Dad would trust. Silver-haired, wearing a cardigan instead of a suit jacket, with pictures of grandchildren covering his desk. He stood when I entered, shaking my hand with both of his, and his first words were, "Your father was one of the finest men I ever knew." I showed him everything. The will Wesley had used, the real will from the safe, and the USB drive. He plugged it into his computer, and we watched together. The video was grainy but clear enough. There was Wesley in Dad's bedroom, Dad propped up in bed, clearly heavily medicated. The date stamp showed 2 months ago, during Dad's worst period when the pain medication made him incoherent. "Just sign here, Dad," Wesley's voice commanded. "It's for your medical power of attorney." "Where's Mona?" Dad's voice was thick, confused. "I want Mona." "She's at work. Just sign here." "This doesn't look right. What am I signing?" "Dad, just sign it. The nurse is waiting." The video showed Wesley actually guiding Dad's hand, forcing the pen through the signature. Dad's eyes were unfocused, his head rolling back against the pillow. After getting the signature, Wesley tucked the papers into his briefcase and left without even adjusting Dad's pillows or checking his water. Mr. Foxworth paused the video and removed his glasses to clean them, though I suspected it was to give himself a moment. "Your father came to me the following week," he said quietly. He'd remembered something about signing papers but couldn't recall what. He was terrified Wesley had done something to cut you out. That's when we drafted the real will, with witnesses he trusted. So the will Wesley has is fraudulent. Worse, it's elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and coercion. Your brother could face criminal charges. He leaned back in his chair. Your father suspected this might happen. He said Wesley had been asking about the estate for months, pressing him to change things. He said, and I quote, "My son measures love in dollars, but Ramona measures it in moments." We spent the next hour strategizing. Foxworth made several calls, including one to the district attorney's office and another to Adult Protective Services. Then he looked at me with a grandfatherly smile and said, "Time to pay your brother a visit. All 3 of us need to be there. Call your siblings." Wesley's house was a monument to his success, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place that photographed well but felt cold to live in. He answered the door in designer jeans and a polo shirt that cost more than I made in a day. "Ramona, what are you doing here?" His eyes narrowed when he saw Mr. Foxworth. "And who's this?" "Wesley Thorne? I'm Gerald Foxworth, representing your father's estate and your sister. May we come in?" Wesley's wife Nora appeared, perfectly styled even on a Saturday morning, her face a mask of Botox and suspicion. "Wesley, what's happening?" "Nothing, honey. Just some confusion about Dad's estate. Ramona's having trouble accepting reality." We sat in their living room that looked like a furniture showroom, everything white and chrome and uncomfortable. Judith arrived 15 minutes later, breathless and worried, Wesley having texted her to come immediately. "This is harassment," Wesley started, his salesman's confidence still intact. "The will is clear, filed with the court. Ramona needs to accept that Dad made his choice." "Which will?" Mr. Foxworth asked pleasantly. "The one you had him sign while he was on morphine, or the real one he filed with me the week before?" The color drained from Wesley's face like water from a sink. "I don't know what you're talking about." That's when I pulled out my phone and played the video. The room went silent except for Dad's confused voice asking for me, Wesley's commanding tone, the scratch of a forced signature. Nora's gasp was sharp as breaking glass. Judith covered her mouth with both hands. When the video ended, Mr. Foxworth spoke 5 words that changed everything. "That's elder abuse and fraud." Wesley jumped to his feet, his carefully constructed composure finally cracking. "That's taken out of context. Dad wanted to make changes. He told me Ramona was bleeding him dry." "Your father was on 60 milligrams of morphine when you forced him to sign," Mr. Foxworth said calmly. "His medical records show he was barely conscious that day. Meanwhile, I have a video of him in my office a week prior, completely lucid, with his doctor's certification of mental competence, explicitly stating his wishes." Judith finally spoke, her voice small and broken. "Wesley, you said Dad wanted this. You said Ramona was manipulating him." "I was protecting our interests," Wesley shouted. "She lived there for free for 5 years." "While being paid as his caregiver," Mr. Foxworth interrupted, pulling out a folder. "Your father paid her a salary from his savings, all documented, all legal, all reported to the IRS. She wasn't living free. She was working 24 hours a day." Nora stood up slowly, her perfect composure cracking like expensive china. "Wesley, is this true? You forged your father's will? You committed fraud?" Wesley turned to her, his hands reaching out. "Nora, baby, you don't understand. This was about protecting what we've built, our lifestyle, our future." "Our lifestyle?" She stepped back from him. "You mean the lifestyle built on stealing from your dying father and homeless sister?" She looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in years. "Ramona, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." Mr. Foxworth pulled out his phone. "Mr. Thorne, we have 2 options. I can call the district attorney now and you can explain this video to them. Or we can resolve this quietly. Your sister gets the house as your father intended, you return any assets you've already taken, and you walk away. You have 60 seconds to decide." Wesley collapsed into his white leather chair, his face aging 10 years in 10 seconds. "This is blackmail." "No," Mr. Foxworth corrected. "Blackmail is threatening to expose something to gain advantage. This is consequence. 50 seconds. "Wesley," Judith whispered, "just agree, please. Haven't we done enough damage?" Wesley looked around his perfect room, at his horrified wife, at his sister who'd finally found her backbone, at me. "Fine, I'll sign whatever you want." The paperwork took 3 hours. Wesley signed over the house, returned the $17,000 he'd already withdrawn from Dad's accounts, and agreed to never contest the real will. When we left, Nora was on the phone with someone, speaking in low, urgent tones. Their divorce would be final 6 months later, and she'd take him for half of everything. That afternoon, I stood in Dad's house, my house now, with Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Yamamoto. They'd both known about the real will all along. "Your father made us promise," Mrs. Patterson said, hugging me tight. "He said if Wesley tried anything, we were to wait for you to find the safe. He said you'd figure it out because you were the smart one." Mr. Yamamoto nodded, his usually stern face soft. "Your father, he say Wesley smart with money, but you smart with heart. Heart more important." 3 months later, I'd turned the house back into a home. My students came for tutoring in the dining room where Dad used to help me with homework. I planted new tomatoes in his garden, using the seeds from his last harvest. Every Sunday, Judith came for dinner, and we slowly rebuilt our relationship over Mom's recipes and Dad's stories. "I was so weak," Judith said one evening, crying into her coffee. "Wesley always made me feel like I had to choose sides, and he was so convincing. Dad never made me feel special the way he made you feel special, and I was jealous." "Dad loved us all differently," I told her, holding her hand across the table where we'd eaten thousands of meals as children. "He just knew I needed him more, and he needed me." Wesley's fall was complete and swift. Word spread through his country club about what he'd tried to do. His dealership sales plummeted when customers learned he'd defrauded his dying father. He moved to another state, started over, but I heard from Nora that he was struggling. She sent me a Christmas card that year with just one line: "Your father would be proud of you." I found one last gift from Dad while cleaning his closet. In his old lunchbox from his mail carrier days was an envelope marked "Open on a Bad Day." Inside was a letter in his shaking handwriting. "My sunshine girl, if you're reading this on a bad day, remember that storms pass but love remains. I know Wesley will probably cause trouble. He's been angry since your mother died, angry that love isn't something you can buy or sell or trade. Judith follows strength, and Wesley looks strong. But you, my Mona, you are strong. The house is yours because you made it a home. The money doesn't matter. What matters is that you were there every morning with my coffee, every evening with your stories about your students. You gave me purpose when I thought I had none left. I'm proud of Wesley's success and Judith's ambition, but I'm in awe of your kindness. Don't let anyone make you feel small for choosing love over money. Your devoted father, Theodore P.S. The tomatoes will grow better if you sing to them. Your mother always did. Now I sit in Dad's chair every morning, drinking coffee made counterclockwise, grading papers while the sun rises over his tomato garden. The locks, Wesley, changed or gone, replaced with new ones, and I keep extra keys with the neighbors who stood witness to the truth. Sometimes the best inheritance isn't money or property, but knowing you were truly loved. And sometimes, when someone tries to lock you out of your own life, you just need to remember where the real keys are hidden. Dad was right. He wasn't a rich man, but he was a prepared man. And because of that preparation, love won over greed, truth won over lies, and I got to keep the home where his memory lives in every corner, every sunrise, every perfectly grown tomato. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that love is stronger than greed. Have you ever faced a family betrayal that turned into an unexpected victory? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences help others know they're not alone. And if you want more stories about families, justice, and the triumph of truth over deception, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Remember, sometimes the hardest battles are with the people who should love us most. But truth has a way of finding the light. Until next time, thank you for listening.